With front and rear gearboxes complete along with the centre differential, it's time to start building out and adding more to the gearboxes, and so it's on to Bag E, the rear end assembly. With this bag we are looking at the rear assembly, so we'll need to work with the rear gearbox section we've built from the previous bag, and with that to hand we can go ahead and empty the contents of Bag E. In this bag we have the rear arms, and just like the ET48 2.0 buggy, they allow a lot more adjustment to your static toe, the height of the hub and so on. Very rigid and of a higher quality too. We also have the hinge pin inserts where you can choose which to use depending on where you want your toe or rear roll centre for instance, and these fit into our aluminum C and D blocks. And finally we have a 2.3mm sway bar along with all sway bar mounting parts and other general hardware. Now the manual starts with the sway bar installed first, although just as I have with other vehicle builds, I like to deviate a little and start with the arms first instead, just so I don't have the sway bar flopping around in the meantime. So with that said, we'll start with the C block, where we need to install inserts on each side. And I'll be sticking to the stock center dot position for now, which provides 1.5 degrees anti-squat. Notice the ridge around the edge, these fit nice and flush into the C block from rear to front. With those in place we can use two of the 14mm button head screws to secure the C block to the front side of the gearbox. Going into plastic here so no thread lock required, although taking care not to over tighten. Moving across to our first arm now, where we insert the 10mm droop screw on the inner centre, followed by a hinge pin bushing on either side, allowing the hinge pin to now fall into place. Repeat with the second arm, so 10mm droop screw, hinge pin bushings, and hinge pin. We can now seat these into position into the C block hinge inserts we just installed, and they'll be secured with the D block. Talking of the D block, that's next, so grab it and insert the hinge pin inserts to either side. Again, I'm sticking with stock, so it's single center dot inserts for 2.5 degrees of rear toe, and push the D block into place, taking care to capture the hinge pins while doing so, before securing into position with a single 10mm button head screw. And that's our arms installed. Notice how free these are, no reaming required at all. Perfect. Okay, so now we concentrate on installation of the sway bar. Start by inserting the two bearings into the rear of the gearbox, before feeding the sway bar through, and then insert a sway bar screw mount onto each end and down towards the bearing. Note that the collar end faces towards the bearing. And then insert set screws into both. Don't tighten down just yet. We need to make sure the sway bar is as centered as possible, so let's get the other ends into position first. To do that, we need to grab our sway bar linkage and insert a pivot ball into each end, one with just the ball, and the other end has a small collar. The Tekno shock tool comes in especially handy here. Repeat with the second linkage arm too. Insert one end of the sway bar into the pivot ball and use a set screw to secure down into position along with a little thread lock applied too, before placing the other end of the linkage into the suspension arm and securing into position by inserting a 20mm cap head screw through the arm and the pivot ball, securing it in place. Repeat the same process on the opposite side, securing the sway bar into position. All that's left is to place on a flat surface, ensuring the sway bar is as centered as possible, and tighten down the two screws towards the center of the sway bar, now securing it into place. And that's the rear end assembly and Bag E complete. The vehicle is starting to take shape nicely now, and although we're 5 bags in, everything has pieced together with perfection. No issues at all. Even the arms are as free as they possibly could be with no extra intervention. Anyway, we'll carry on finishing up the rear end in the next video with Bag F, containing the rear hubs and camber links.